Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. My name is Rene Perez. I'm the curator of the Leica Store New York SoHo exhibit space. This evening, we're going to be having a little conversation with Richard Sandler, and we're going to be discussing his book, The Eyes of the City. And we're also going to get a preview on another book that he's working on that is tentatively titled Second Eyes. The Eyes of the City was published by powerHouse Books in 2016 and has been highly acclaimed by both the photo press as well as the art press. Richard has also directed and shot 8 nonfiction films, including The Gods of Times Square, and let me get some pictures moving here. Gods of Times Square, The Gods of Times Square. Richard always corrects me on that. And Brave New York and Radioactive City. Actually, Richard did not start out as a photographer and didn't really start taking pictures until he was 31. And in fact, his career has had a few twists and turns. In his early incarnation, A.K. Dickey was a pool and billiards hustler, so watch out for Richard if you see him in a pool hall. While living in Boston, he studied macrobiotic cooking and was involved in the development of the organic food movement from 1966 to 1978. He's also a licensed acupuncturist and has practiced in the Commonwealth countries as well as the United States. Richard began photographing in 1977, and he started with a Leica 3F red dial, for those of you that might know what a red dial is, Leica 3F. That was gifted to him by a dear friend of his. When Richard returned to New York City, he started as a messenger and then started doing freelance photography for the New York Times and Barron's magazine. In between, back and forth from jobs and between taking care of his young son at the time, he was constantly with a Leica camera photographing on the streets and in the subways, back and forth. And interestingly enough, he was generally finished on photographing on the street by 3 o'clock because that's what time he had to meet. He had to meet the bus for his son, or be home for his son. Sandler's photographs are in permanent collections of the Brooklyn Museum, the Museum of the City of New York, the New York Historical Society, the Center for Creative Photography at the University of Arizona, and in many other institutions and private collections. He has been twice awarded the New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship for Photography and fellowships from both the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation and the New York State Council on the Arts for Filmmaking. Richard's work has been very influenced by both Robert Frank and Gary Winogrand and others, which he will tell us about. But his style and his pursuit of his visual truth is all his own. On that note, Richard, it's great to see you. We've had a good time working on this, and hopefully we're going to have a good time presenting this. How are you doing up there in the Berkshires?
Pretty good. Actually, I'm in the Catskills, but that's pretty close.
Oh, damn.
It's not that far away.
Well, there's more comedy clubs in the Catskills than the Berkshires, I guess. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So, today we're going to be looking at your at the photographs from your book, The Eyes of the City.
Yes.
And well, we should just start in. One of the first pictures that I think I want to look at here, I've been trying to do a bit of a presentation here, is this one. Because this one is the cover of the book, but it also is highly representative of the title of the book, The Eyes of the City. And as you can see, if you study it closely enough, and not even that closely, there are 4 sets of eyes all focused on you. Did this picture in particular inspire the title, or did you have other experiences or thoughts behind it?
Well, it did inspire the title because everybody's looking at me, and I wanted it to be rather clear up front that though certainly these are, my eyes are seeing these things, but I'm not saying that I'm the eyes of the city, but I'm part of the eyes of the city. Everybody's always looking at one another in the city. And so this makes it rather clear that I'm also including other people's eyes. So it seemed like the perfect picture to be on the cover. And also just the serendipity of it was, it was clear it was a pretty good picture to put up, and to show and to put it on the cover of a book I made. So yeah, and it started from there. And as I went through my work, I saw that there were many photographs where people's eyes are, just so important. In this one, they're eyeball to eyeball. Or maybe their eyes are closed, who knows, but they can open them. And so, I was prancing around New York City, in all parts of the city pretty much, but mainly Midtown, and photographing pretty intensively, both on the streets and in the subway.
Now, you had been actually shooting this for quite a long time, but you didn't really start editing for a book until around 2014?
Yeah. I guess we started the edit around 2015. Although I had made many selections, and laid them out on the floor by myself a couple of times, and I was pretty aware of, at that point, of what I had, but I didn't actually start working with an editor. Worked with Regina Monfort, and she came over to my house, and then we really, were editing the book. But first I got an agreement from powerHouse Books, and an advance as well, to make the book. And that really helped. And so we went into high gear and, just started moving pictures around, kind of like a Rubik's Cube, and trying to find the way through the work in book form, which is different than, gallery form, although there are similarities. But
yeah, it's a different narrative structure.
Yeah,
you lay it out in a different way.
Sure.
Here's again one where eye contact is absolutely essential. This and another picture we just passed a few moments ago, we discussed while we were preparing for this. And one of the things that caught me was that my interpretation of the pictures was so completely different than your personal experience with it. I personally, at looking at this picture, find this young woman very engaging. I almost feel like she's reaching out to you. And your reaction was, or she's pushing me away. And, it's interesting how you can have such totally different interpretations of images by not having been there or just having a different experience. This picture also has that same sense. I didn't realize initially that these kids, although I guess I should have, because the first young lady on the left is leaning onto this blonde young woman as well. And I thought initially that this woman was actually reaching out to get the kids to sit up straight and not be leaning on somebody. But as you told me, it's a different story.
Yeah, that's not their mother. I had taken 2 or 3 pictures before the Black woman came onto the train, and then when she came onto the train, I took another picture. That's this one, and she's putting her hands in front of the kids' faces to try to block my camera because I'm, maybe Whitey stealing, souls or something. She was very upset with me for doing it, but that is the story, and that's the reason why the kids are leaning. They're asleep and they're leaning on the woman that they were out with.
They're totally out.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
very comfortably out.
yeah. I really like the guy's hand on the right. If there was, you can really see his veins and the way he folds the New York Times. That's something, very unique to New York City to
Well,
fold.
that was definitely something that we all were concerned about. How do you fold a newspaper in the subway?
On the subway, yeah. So that's another little sort of sidelight in the photograph.
Another one that we also discussed that I have a slightly different interpretation than the reality that you have is this one, which I found I was envisioning as a very sensitive moment between these two people, a very fleeting moment of them looking into each other's eyes, and then this train passing by also in a blur, somehow feeling also fleeting. But then you told me that actually their eyes were closed because there was a lot of dust flying around at the moment.
Right. They were having a moment, but their eyes were not closed at all. And the train's pulling out and it's kicking up a lot of dust. And so the moment becomes, more poetic than it actually was, or more beautiful, really, than it actually was. So it's a good teaching tool in a sense, because, what you're photographing is just exactly what happens, what you see, what the reality of a moment is, not, and you don't know anything about it. It's photography, still photography is extremely romantic in that sense, because you never really know for sure what's going on. I also could have told them to do that for all we know. But anyway, it lives. The reason why it has such a life is because her eyes are closed and the train is pulling out and it's dusty. And, I was just lucky, to be in the right place at the right time. The photo gods threw me a bone there,
Well,
So
they threw a lot of
they do
bones.
that.
If what we're going to look at this evening is any indication of the gods being with you.
Well, they were on my side, I must say.
Yeah. This one I also am fascinated with, again, having all the textures with the graffiti and being in a crowded subway car, yet she's so totally alone with that one, the way she's framed in that window. That's I'm always interested in the individual alone in an environment that may not be an environment where they're not, in an environment where they're actually not alone. And this one, I'm particularly fascinated with this one because of that. This one, you wanted to point out that this one is in the auction today at the Bronx Documentary Center. They have an annual auction every fall, and this one is up. And you've participated in that before. It's a very worthy auction they do incredibly fine work.
Absolutely, and their community outreach in the South Bronx is just wonderful, and they've helped so many kids, come into themselves and to, establish an identity as journalists, as photographers, as filmmakers. And Mike Camber, who runs it, is a terrific guy. And anyway, so I donated this picture for the auction, which closes tonight at 7, I believe.
Oh boy.
And then there is a bit of an event at 8. So the Bronx Documentary Center, I think it's .org. Anybody who wants to see, there's many photographs that are up for auction, as well as books from the likes of Susan Maizala, signed books, and Daoud Bey, and others, and a bunch of photographs. So I just wanted to plug that great organization.
Yeah, and it is a worthy organization to plug.
Absolutely. I
I'm very
donate a
impressed with the work they
picture
do.
every year. They're terrific.
At any rate, what I was taken by in all of our conversations is that your interest in the subways was one in which you had no other choice because you were on the subway every day going from home to work, but you made the most of that environment while you were doing your daily commute. And then when you were working, you were also taking advantage of the street as well. And you know, most of us, if we go out, we go, okay, I got some time, I think I'll go out. But you were actually doing it while you were doing everything else, and you were always home by 3 o'clock. Pretty
Yes,
impressive.
I was very disciplined because I had to be. I like to say I had a chirping bird in the nest and I had to bring home worms, you know. But and that was good because I would hit the streets early in the morning. I would get onto the streets around 9:30. In the early years, as I said, as you said, I was a foot messenger. I carried, you know, packages from one location to another, having a beeper, and I'd get a beep, and they'd tell me to go to a certain place and pick up a package, and bring it, you know, to another place. Didn't make a lot of money, but it was a way to be on the street and also a way to get to parts of the city that I would not normally have gone on my own. So it was actually very, it had a very positive effect on my photography because I was always someplace new. I wasn't going, or not always, but often enough, I was going to places new to me and you know, that I would not have chosen to be there on my own. A little bit like being a cab driver. And I also did that. I actually, when I very first started photography in Boston in 1977, I was a cab driver and I had my Leica with me and I was shooting from the cab for the same reason, that I would find myself in places that I would, you know, it would happen by chance, by randomness. And I loved that. And, you know, kept me very fresh, you know, in the beginning of it all. And then as the years went on, I got, you know, more of a career as a, you know, like a photojournalist and editorial photographer working for newspapers and magazines, principally in New York. I didn't travel very much, but working for Barron's, as you mentioned, in the New York Times, Manhattan Lawyer magazine, a whole bunch of them, and was able to put together a pretty good career. But the point being that in between jobs, I'm always on the street. And I always had enough equipment with me that were I to get an assignment, I could go do it on the spot, you know, in Manhattan.
And you carried a pager, so if the New York
Right,
Times had something that they needed covered immediately, you were available.
exactly. So it worked great. I was, you know, thoroughly addicted to being out there and shooting, and I loved it. And I was, you know, working on my, you know, vision, both as an artist, perhaps, and also as a citizen who is, you know, living in a society with all sorts of disconnects. And so, you know, the politics of the street became very important. That is to say, you see on the street, you know, you're taking the pulse of the society you live in, you know, if you're out there every day, particularly. And, you know, you have a, you really see what's going on, you know. And it was the beginning of a political awareness that's only grown since then. Plus, I have to say, my son was a huge influence on me because he was a very politically active young person and brought that home and, you know, basically, you know, helped me, you know, raise my consciousness, you know, as a teenager.
Well, certainly not all of these pictures, but many of them have a strong socially aware presence. And this one in particular, we agreed we should discuss because you've said it on a number of pictures that I've seen, that you didn't feel necessarily great about taking it, but you just felt it had to be documented.
And I even said that to them. They were very, very mad at me. I mean, the kids didn't say anything. They just look a little, you know, scared possibly, or, you know, questioning what the hell, who is this guy? But the women were very mad at me, and I understood why. It was probably because maybe some or more than one were undocumented. I don't know that, but anyway, or that they felt, you know, uncomfortable with just being photographed so point blank. But I said to them, I'm sorry, I have to do this. I have to make this picture. And so that didn't help, but I did say that for the record. And I didn't feel great about taking it, but I had to do it because this is something that needs to be seen. You know, this is asking, you know, structural questions of the society we live in, and bringing up all, you know, manner of political topics, particularly, you know, race in this culture, and why is it that Black women are you know, strolling around town with, you know, with white babies, and you don't see, or toddlers, and you don't see it the other way around. You don't, but I want to do that. I've always wanted to organize a bunch of, you know, white women to be, you know, moving around the city with Black kids in strollers, and, you know, you know, a little performance piece. But nonetheless, you know, I felt very strongly that, you know, certain things had to be seen, had to be photographed. Seen, yes, but photographed. And this was one of them. And you know, it was a fortunate composition in that, you know, it goes edge to edge and still holds up, but is on the edge of falling apart as well.
Yeah, we discussed this at one point as to how the various ways this could have worked out. But in terms of a photograph, at least I was projecting what other ways it could work out. They could have all stood there and posed for you. And even though you're saying the same thing, it wouldn't be as strong as these two that are moving out of the picture at the same time. It just, the whole tension that's created by their movement is what, one of the things that makes this picture really strong. They could have just stood there all and looked at the camera. It would have said one thing, but this says something else because of,
well, this is where, you know, form serves content. You know, content comes first, but, you know, you need to put that content in a formal arrangement such that it begins to have content as well. You know, I mean, just the fact that the picture is kind of centrifugal, you know, you feel like, you know, it could fall apart very easily.
On the verge of falling apart.
Yeah, and yet it's still held together with a kind of tensile strength, you know. So you know, it was, you know, I'm moving as I'm shooting this. You know, I'm doing my best to be as conscious as I possibly can, and you know, to try to make the best frame I can. And you know, it worked out here. You know, there are plenty of times it didn't work out. Course.
Yeah, we'll go into that later, how form and content complement and not complement each other, and end up making some pretty amazing pictures if you just kind of push the frame a little bit, sometimes a lot.
This one I'm very partial to, just because you only see the boy looking at the woman who has arthritis, I believe, or at least he's also maybe looking at mortality itself, maybe even his own mortality, or I mean, I'm projecting that obviously, yeah, but you don't see any.
No, I would project that he is just becoming aware of mortality.
Yeah, it seems like a moment, but then there's nobody else. You don't see any other faces. So that was also very fortunate. And the line of the straw and the looks like a Bergdorf Goodman bag the woman has on the left. That line kind of like leads in, and you know, again, it's where the form, you know, really really enhances the content, I think. And so this one was, you know, one that I was certainly always going to put
Yeah,
on.
I've on the one hand, I step back from it every time I see it, but then I always fall into it, especially the little boy's face with the straw in his mouth. Always kind of gets me, and then I go, okay, I like it.
Yeah, that's the starting point. That one had a title at one point. It was called Mortality and a Cherry Coke, because that that is a cherry Coke there.
Ah, okay.
With more resolution that could be seen. This one is a fun one to talk about because they were pretty much immobile. I showed up, I saw they were having a fight. I saw his hands, you know, and but I knew it needed a flash, and I didn't have a flash on the camera. So I quick dipped into my bag and put my battery pack on my belt and hooked up the flash. And that took about, oh, maybe 60 or 70 or 80 seconds to put that all together, to, you know, reset the camera and get the flash ready. I did it as quickly as possible, and they hadn't moved a muscle.
Well, apparently he was moving, but she probably kept her hands on her hips like that. And it's
Well,
really great.
but I know his hands were I took 3 pictures without the flash, and the hands are more or less in the same place. I mean,
really? Oh,
not exactly, but they're still, you know, like, I'm sorry, or whatever, you know, whatever he's saying.
Wasn't me, honey.
But we've all been there, you know, male and female, and that's just, you know, fun. This is the joy. This is like the joy of street photography, you know.
Well, and as you say, the gods threw you yet another bone.
This is definitely
because, you know, 30 seconds, 5 seconds could completely obliterate the scene.
Yeah, and I wasn't prepared. So it was amazing that I was able to make a picture. Dogs are my comic relief. I love photographing dogs. I love dogs. I was born in the year of the dog, if that means anything. But
it could.
It might. But it was, you know, just sort of comic relief, because I'm out there taking, you know, pictures that are, you know, sometimes soaked in, you know, sort of existential dread and, you know, political heaviness and such. And I know I have to do that, but dogs are my my sort of solace, and I love photographing dogs, and I still do it.
Now this is in Boston where you first started shooting.
Yeah, in fact, that's the street I used to
and the
live
next
on.
shot, yeah, this one is interesting because you say it's one of the first pictures that you took that you liked.
It was the first picture, yeah.
And it, you know, you speak about it in terms of the noir sense of it, but it was also shot with that Leica 3F.
Yes.
Right. And in your dedication to the book, it's a dedication to Mary McClellan, who gave you the camera. Upon seeing my first pictures made in her basement darkroom, Mary said to me, "You are a photographer," and then gave me her Leica to prove it. To her and to her husband, David McClellan, I am eternally grateful. Perhaps a little bit of their kindness, generosity, perspicacity. Is that correct? Perspicacity?
No, perspicacity.
Good, you said it.
Yep.
Rubbed off on my work, on this work. And until I realized that there was that connection, this didn't mean quite the same to me, because that camera they gave you is well represented here in probably more than one picture.
Yes, yes. All the Boston pictures, or most of the Boston pictures, I used that camera.
Did that include this one?
Yes, it did.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought that this had been done with the 3F. But
well, I had
a camera, you can take pictures with it.
Well, also I had a, a Spiegelzucker, a sports finder. This
Ah,
was with,
okay.
this was with a screw mount 35 millimeter Summicron for those people that, talk that language. They're pretty rare, and they were among the sharpest lenses that Leica had ever made until, the modern era. Very highly sought after, and I had one. So this was a 35 millimeter with an auxiliary viewfinder.
That was the Summicron.
Yes, Summicron. Did I
Yeah,
say
so that
that?
would have been a very much one that at then would have been sought after, and definitely sought after today,
Yeah,
because as you say, those lenses are renowned for their sharpness and their tonalities.
incredibly sharp. I actually have one that I'm borrowing from a friend at the moment.
We're about to switch into another group of pictures, but a couple of questions have come up.
Yes, please.
Obviously, this is all film, and so there's a couple of questions about whether you're still shooting film and how much you're photographing to this day. But also, question, can he explain the printing process? Example, how much was involved in the reflection image on page 161, which I don't know which one. Do you have a memory of page 161 off the top of your head?
I can get the book. It's just right behind
What
me.
is Richard's focal length of choice?
The focal length of choice is all of the above, but primarily a 28, also a 35. But I do use 50 occasionally, and more than occasionally, I use a 21. And occasionally I use a 90. So I'll use whatever I can. And in those days, I carried every one of them, although I didn't have a 21 when this picture was made. But just to have it, and you never know when you're going to need it. And also to keep my chops up, with each lens.
It's this reflection picture.
Oh, okay.
And the question was, how much work was involved in the reflection image in terms of printing?
Oh, in terms of printing, it printed, very easily, and there was not. It's a good negative, and there was. I mean, I saw the reflection for sure, and I knew that was part of the picture, big part of the picture, and so, there was no problem pulling that out if that's the question.
Yeah, that seems to have been that maybe it was a very difficult image to print, or maybe
Not at all.
balance out the reflections versus the shadows versus.
No, they were close enough together. It was not hard at all. It's easy to print.
Another question is, and this is obviously purely a personal thing between people. What separates a good photograph from a perfect photograph?
Oh, well, there's a big question for you. A good photograph, I guess, is one you like, and a great photograph is one that you, are in love with. I guess it's just another level. But it's very important to keep that in mind when editing. Because you do come upon great photographs in your work. If you shoot a lot, particularly every day, and you love it, you will get great photographs. But finding them is another ball game. So you do have to make that very distinction between an A and a B, or an A and a C. The A photographs, the great ones, are few and far between, but you get them, and you have to be very clear about what really moves you. So it's a moment where you just check in with yourself, and you watch the flutter of your heart, or the movement of your legs or something. It moves you. When you get moved by something, then that it could be in the great category.
Another question is, and kind of know the answer to this one, is photo school necessary?
Well, I didn't go to photo school exactly, although I did interface with photo school. I did sit in on a class at Harvard taught by the great Ben Lifson, who used to be the photography critic for the Village Voice way back when the Village Voice was around and when the Village Voice had a photo critic that got a paycheck every week. Anyway, he taught at Harvard in the first year, 77, that I started and photography, and I was allowed to sit in on his class. And that was my first exposure to Robert Frank and Cartier-Bresson and Gary Winogrand, and I didn't even know.
What year was that?
1977.
Okay, so it was basically when you first started.
Yeah, basically when I first started. So,
so just to give another perspective on that question, possibly, and I view it from how you talk about photography, is that going to school for photography isn't all that there is to it. It's understanding how people make images, what people make images of, the history, so to speak, of it, and getting a very rounded look at the different people's work and different people's opinions. You, as you said, you also studied with Gary Winogrand, which would have been an amazing thing to do, to be in his presence in those kind of environments. He was very generous from what I could tell, and probably maybe very generous with his opinions too. But
it was great. I took a weekend workshop, and it was Ben Lifson in his class. He mentioned at the end of the class that Winogrand was coming to Boston and giving a workshop. And if anybody in the class wanted to take it, he said, you know, he highly recommended that you do that. And I did. And that was the summer of 1977. And it was wonderful. I was just kind of speechless at how articulate he was, and of course I was beginning to know his photographs from Ben's class, so it was really a gas to hang out with him. It was just a weekend. 2 people got kicked out of the class because they thought that he was a charlatan, so he kicked him out. So that left only like 4 or 5 other people, so we had Winogrand to ourselves, and I watched him like a hawk. I really learned a lot watching him shoot, because we all went out together to shoot. And I was amazed at how he was able to make himself essentially invisible.
Yeah.
Just by being Mr. Nobody, like certainly not wearing the camera around his neck, not focusing, looking up, looking down, looking left, looking right, so that I know Todd, I think it was Todd Papa George in the Winogrand movie. He mentioned that about Gary, and that was absolutely the case. So anyway, I watched him. I think I learned, pretty much what I needed to learn in terms of how to comport myself as a photographer on the street, just by watching him in those days. And it touched a lot of what I already had, which was a kind of agility through sports, growing up playing sports so much that I was able to move. Winogrand talked about having basketball moves, and I already had them too before I was a photographer. So, I put that to good use, and I, kind of copied that. But actually, he didn't move that much. He had good moves, but he tended to stay in one place and just be invisible. I tend to move quite a bit more than he did.
So the answer to that question would be, yes, it's important, but you still have to learn on
well,
your
the thing,
own.
yeah, the other thing that I want to mention.
It's all about vision in the end.
It is, exactly. But once you get a good picture, that first one, that kid looking at his cross, I was really hooked at that moment, because that was wow. I mean, I couldn't do. First of all, the camera was broken. The shutter speed was too fast, not too slow. I think I set it at 125 at f11 or f16, I forget. But the shutter speed was really actually 500th of a second. When I took it in to be repaired, I found out that the shutter speeds the upper shutter speeds were too fast. That happens with cameras, that are spring wound. So anyway, but I loved that. I loved that noirish look. And it, of course, reminded me of the films I grew up with in the 50s, being a child of television, when TV was only black and white. My mother was on TV. She was an actress. So I saw the world in black and white, the media world in black and white from the get-go. And that look was what I wanted. And so I definitely tried to put that in my repertoire of how I wanted to see the world, because that look has a certain feeling that it's a kind of depth to it.
So we're going to move into your newer work, or the newer editing of your work. But there was something we were talking about, well, what I was talking about is that your book had a slightly different look from the images that you're starting to print now, and you're planning for your second book that you tentatively title Second Eyes. And the thing that I first noticed was that, as compared to many of your earlier pictures, and we've discussed this several times already, there was a certain formal sense to some of these images. That is to say, the horizons were more straight, although not always. They were a little bit more direct. And now you're editing you're letting yourself go a little bit and look at things that you might have rejected on the first time around. Now, you told me a story about, and I think this is a good time to retell that story, when you dropped your portfolio off at MoMA and met for the only time that you met John Sierkowski, who was the director of the photography at the time?
Yeah. I met Sierkowski. I dropped my portfolio off at the MoMA. I came back to pick it up on the appointed day, and the secretary that normally sits in the anteroom of the photography department at MoMA was maybe at lunch, anyway, not at her desk, and sitting there was Susan Kismarek, the second in command. I said, "Hi, I'm Richard Sandler. I'm here to pick up my portfolio." And she said to me, "Oh, you had the portfolio of pictures that were not nice." And I couldn't believe that I heard that, that I'd gone to Oz and the Empress in this case had no clothes. Anyway, so unbeknownst to me, John Sierkowski was in the room, was in the lounge there, and overheard this conversation that I had with her, and immediately comes right up to me and comes right into my face. And he said to me, "I saw your portfolio. And I said, "I know who you are." He said, "I saw your portfolio." And then he closed his eyes and he shook his head and he said, I liked it very much." And then he opens his eyes and looks at me and says, "I hope you receive the recognition you deserve before you're 70," and walks away. That's it.
And the punctuation to this was that The Eyes of the City was published when you were 70 years old.
That's right.
So he predicted it.
He sure did.
But he could have moved it along a little faster.
Well, he could have if he wanted to, but he was saying he wasn't going to. But it freed me. And it was actually a great gift.
But the reason I bring it up is because I get a sense that the edit for the first book was in some ways influenced by that. Maybe I'm stretching it out too far.
Well, it's stretching it a little bit, but I did want to make a first book that was, as communicative, as it possibly could be. I didn't want to like a picture like this was not going to go into the book. I wasn't really prepared to deal as much with race, you know, in that first book. Although there are certainly pictures in
No,
it,
there's plenty in there
plenty in there,
that
but
you can
I
hang a
wanted them
social
to be,
agenda on.
I wanted them to be, you know, possibly it's even didactic, but I wanted them to be, you know, a little bit harder hitting, you know what I mean? But then I started going through my work. But when I say then, I'm now 4 or 5 or 6 years older than when, you know, the first book was made. And in the process of these years of going through my work all over again, I found lots of pictures that, you know, I was taking in those days, but, you know, I wasn't really ready to see the merit in them. And then in going through the pictures in the last 4 years, I began to actually see it, and I realized that, you know, there is a whole nother book there.
Well, and the question then becomes, why did you not, because we've discussed this, you didn't give this picture its space. You didn't allow it to exist on paper. You saw it on negative. You might have made a proof print of it, but it didn't get farther than that.
Well, the reason is the leg coming out of her chin, which now, of course, I love, but I didn't, you know, I didn't want to play footsie with my photographs. I wanted, you know, the leg to, you know, just not be there. So, you know, I'd seen the picture many, many times, and I liked it. I always liked it, but I wasn't going to include it in the first book. But as I said, I changed. I became looser. I became more open. And I also became more political. And I wanted, you know, and I went through my work because, you know, I wanted to address myself to, you know, the insanity of this, of the way this society is structured, race-wise, you know, and the incorrectness of it, you know. So I just started asking more structural questions, and in that, asking those questions, you know, I came up with pictures or found pictures that I had either not seen before or had rejected for one reason or another.
And that is one of the beauties, I believe, in allowing yourself to go back and re-edit, rethink, because sometimes a few years or a few decades make a tremendous amount of difference as to how you view your work.
Absolutely.
And I'm so thrilled that you're doing this, because it only reinforces what I felt for such a long time, and seeing it from somebody who had done such a great job in the first book, that you'll be able to reprise it and make it, well, you can address the social agenda a little bit better, or a little bit with a little bit better perspective than you were able to do on the first time around.
But the other thing too is that the editing of these pictures comes, you know, after the, you know, the relative success of you know, having become a videographer and a filmmaker, and having made, you know, these flicks, The Gods of Times Square and Brave New York, which is about the East Village, and you know, my associations with Reverend Billy also, you know, just I became much more political. So you know, I looked at my work from a different sort of structural point of view, and realized I want to tell this story, the story of this picture. You know, I'm not saying what the story is. You make up the story, you know, in the best pictures. But, you know, I just want to put this information in front of people, you know, and let it be maybe like a meme, you know, that creeps into the brain and has some, you know, positive effect. I think video and film, or particularly video and sound film, sound video and sound film, are, you know, ultimately, you know, a more direct way of doing that, and that's when I made the switch, you know, completely, pretty much, to shooting video and shooting film, motion picture film. But, you know, these things, and another one of these pictures, you know, there's questions of race in the picture. There's, you know, it just, the photograph that asks the most questions, you know, in many times is the best one, you know, and leaves them unanswered. And so, you know, you leave looking at picture with many questions in your mind is my hope. I don't know what's going on here. I don't know what's going on here
going
either.
on here either, for sure.
I have no idea what's going on here. I have a guess, but I don't know. I didn't ask. I think she's related to him, but, or maybe they're waiting for an ambulance or waiting for something. I do not know, but whatever it is, it smells bad.
Smells human to me.
What's that?
Smells human.
Yeah, sure.
That's good.
I hear a Donna Ferrato back
I
there.
heard a Donna Ferrato in there, yeah.
Come on, bad is good. That sounds bad. It's good. We smell people in these pictures.
Yeah, well, I mean, the you know, the racial reality on the street is you know, is bad. You know, it's terrible in this country. But I understand where you're coming from. But
It was better. Yeah. It was better. It was more equal.
Then,
yeah. Now, it's cold now.
What's that? It's cold now. Yes, sure. It was cold then too. It's always been cold. You know, it's a society, you know, built on white supremacy. So of course it's going to be cold. But
so we get back onto the subway here, and we talked about how in this particular image, this is on the platform of where you would get off the subway.
Right, Long Island City.
And we talked about how, for both of us, the World Trade Centers were always that thing that you would look for every time you get out of a subway station. First thing you'd look for is those World Trade Centers to reorient yourself. Where am I? Which way do I need to go? And this struck me for that reason. And what I didn't notice before is that you've got the Twin Towers with the space, but then you have the railroad track also with a space going through, and you've got other vertical lines with spaces between them. It's one of those things that I think you see in your unconscious. You've trained your head to see things, and you catch it. You know, it's momentary. You didn't even know you had it at the moment. You said you took one frame, probably underexposed as well.
Yeah. I don't think if I thought about if I thought about it, I probably would have, you know, exposed it more, but I'm happy with the results. Right.
One of the things that I'm very impressed with in your images of the subway is the weight of the images. That is to say, you feel the metal of that train, the dirt on it, the rivets, the accordion. I mean, there's a certain weight that I don't always feel from photographs, and I'm very, very taken by this one. Also, it has a great, you have the conductor, you have somebody's face in the background, and then between the trains you see somebody farther in there, a boy, and that just all of a sudden gives you, it's a gift. If you spend enough time looking for it, you'll find the boy in the background, and it's quite a gift for the viewer to always have something to find, which is something that I find is important with your photographs, that they have enough depth that you can come back to them again and again, which I consider to be a certain level of greatness, that you can look at a picture once and then look at it again and you find something you didn't see before.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm trying to work it every which way I possibly can. You know, I'm looking for that kid between the cars, and, you know, anything else, you know, to boost them up, you know. So You know, these pictures are from the same period as the first book. So, you know, it's a companion. This will be a companion volume to the first one, because the first one clearly could have been quite a bit longer.
It would have been unwieldy, any much bigger than it is.
Yeah, and that's why we stopped.
The next few pictures I'm particularly fascinated by, because of course they're all very momentary. They're just moments that you were just aware enough and ready enough to get them. This one I particularly like the shape that the woman makes, the S curve with her. She has 1 foot in the train, 1 foot out of the train. The guy has his hands up. You see light passing through his fingers, and you see his profile going. And it's a very, I don't want to say it's a very gentle picture, but it's a picture that has a certain, they're familiar with each other, they're comfortable with each other, or at least that's what it seems. You know, it could be something completely different, as we've already acknowledged before. This next shot almost gives the opposite. And this is one that I was less inclined towards until I actually became engaged with it, truly engaged with it. And I saw her hands holding this guy in place against this girder, this pillar. And the look in her face she's so determined to hold on to this guy if in fact he's trying to get away. You never know what's going on.
I love her energy.
Yeah, she's a force to be reckoned with, that's for sure. This one, you know, I'm fascinated by the composition of it and the way your eye pulls through from the musician up around to people, to the guy who's dancing, to then down the girder to the guy sitting listening to it. And then you discover that there's somebody probably passed out there. And it's a discovery process that's, again, makes the picture beyond just a photograph. Maybe this goes to the answer, what makes a great photograph? It's one that allows you to discover. It doesn't tell you everything immediately. You have to learn it and discover it.
And that's also very often the nature of using a wide angle lens, you know, because it eats up a lot of real estate, you know.
Well, using it well.
Yes, using it well, of course.
This one, when you first showed it to me, or when we first looked at it together, you were telling me that you liked it a lot, but you were just always sorry that you didn't get the child's face in better. And my feeling was that you couldn't have made the picture any better, no matter how you'd have pushed the composition. You're already pushing the composition out to as far as it can be, because you're tilting the camera so you can get the signage in the background, cigarettes and magazines. You have the graffiti, and it all leads to this woman's face, and she's just someplace else. And it's such a beautiful scene. And it goes back to the other subway picture that you had of the woman in the window, where she's present but not really. And this woman is somewhat the same. She's present physically, but you know, there's something else that's occupying her mind.
Yeah.
I guess until the door closes.
I think I took a second picture actually. But yes, I like this one. And that person, Mega,
Oh, right, you mentioned that.
The graffiti Mega. My friend Greg LaMarche is or was, I'm not sure if the person's still alive or not, but he's a graffiti artist himself, and he knew that person quite well. He actually found this picture in my contact sheets.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I didn't know I had shot it.
Oh.
There have been a number of surprises, but I love this picture. You know, photographing in the subway, I was amazed when I moved to New York from Boston for good in 1980, at the end of 1980. I was amazed that there was virtually nobody shooting in the subway that I could see. you know, on a daily basis. So I was amazed, but because it you know, there's so much beauty on the subway, and you know, the graffiti to me was beautiful, and you know, it was, you know, it expressed a city trying to express itself, you know, and people who were, you know, dealt out of the hand, you know, whatever, you know, just using the as you know, the city as their canvas to, you know, borrow an expression. But, you know, could be dangerous. You know, this guy, you know, was very close to hitting me, the guy in the middle. You know, I mean, I'm not disguising the fact that I'm photographing, right? So, you know, I did put myself in danger. And this, in the street, you can, you know, run away, or you can deal with it, or whatever, you know, whatever strategy you might have on the street. You don't have those strategies on the, I mean, you can of course deal with it too.
You have to apply other strategies.
Yeah, other ones. But it was, I felt like you know, I measured my gumption more by photographing in the subway than photographing on the street.
Huh.
And I came up with a, you know, a bunch of, you know, my success rate on the subway was pretty good.
Yeah, no, and in fact, initially I thought of your work as being primarily on subways. You know, there were obviously things on the street, but what I remember the most, especially from the exhibit we did at the store, was the subway pictures. I have to mention to people right now, we're probably going to be running over a few minutes, maybe a little bit more than a few minutes, because we're only about 2/3 the way through here. But let's continue on here. So this one was an interesting one in the sense that you caught this moment.
That guy,
he wasn't happy about either, you
yeah,
said.
that guy really almost slugged me, because he saw me take this picture, and he was a bad mofo, this dude. You know, I was just a little scared, I have to say, because he, you know, I sort of busted him here.
Well, you know, it's the testosterone.
It didn't happen.
These next three pictures, well, not this one, although it's, again, I love that wall just written and over and over and over again. It becomes something else besides
like
tagging.
Jackson Pollock painting.
Yeah.
Or something.
But the next three, we both agreed, have some very interesting properties to them. I was fascinated by them, and there was another one we ended up not using because of viewing through the windows like this. I've seen it so many times, I've never pushed it. I suspect it's partially what you were saying the other day, that it's a combination of that these particular trains don't exist anymore, that level of dirt and grime, and the windows are worn out and they're just dusty. And then the use of film that almost enhances that grit and increases the surface. I mean, this is one example of how film lives in a whole place into itself.
Yeah, I think that's true, because the surfaces are so grainy inherently, and you know, the film really likes that.
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
you would never mistake this for a digital image.
I suppose somebody in 1,000 years might, but
yeah, maybe, but not at the moment. You know, one thing I did want to say is that, I mean, of course, any work from this period will express this idea, but this is, you know, the end of the last age before cell phones and the internet and so forth. And, you know, and what a difference it is, you know, that people are not on phones and not in the bubble, you know, of their own little privacy of their phone conversation. I mean, they may be in their heads, but they're, you know, they're really on the street, they're really on the train, and they're really there, and there's no going anywhere.
You could say they're actually quite present.
Yeah, yeah, more so than now. I mean, I take my hat off to people that can make pictures of people on the street that are on cell phones, or, you know, include people on cell phones in their pictures. But to me, it's barely photographic. It's maybe anti-photographic.
Let's move on to some comic relief here. Although this one is pretty serious with the two guys asleep back there.
That's Gem Spa, you know, it's
Oh,
no
that is
longer.
Gem Spa.
Yeah, that's Gem Spa. That's not there
And
anymore.
this dog almost looks guilty as
I
he's
know.
going by.
I know. Giving me the hairy eyeball.
You were saying about dogs, the difference between dogs and people. Didn't you say something about that? That was
No, just
profound.
that, you know, it's easy to photograph dogs. You know, Winogrand said photographing dogs is like shooting hoops on a 4-foot basket. You know, it's true. But you know, that's, you know, that's fine by me. I don't care. You know, I mean, it's still, you still have formal elegance if you, you know, if you can put formal elegance into a photograph. You know, it is what it is, and it transcends the content to a certain extent, you know.
This is another picture that I did not interpret correctly. I saw a playful dog and a playful kid, but in fact, you said that was not the case at all with this.
Yeah, he was very angry at me. But, you know, that's the nice thing about pictures. They can be interpreted variously, you know. Sometimes not, but.
So there was a quote, and we've already discussed it a little bit, that from one of an interview. I don't remember whose interview I'm stealing the quote from. You said Winogrand talked about the dialogue between form and content. He said the best pictures were ones in which the form was threatening to overwhelm the content and the content was threatening to overwhelm the form. It became clear to me that the formal aspect of pictures also has content. Whatever jarring or harmonious arrangement exists within the frame is a form of content. It is not obvious. It's not as obvious as the subject matter of a picture, but when form becomes content, you really feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's becoming more where you're going with this newer edit. Although I've seen this picture before, so it's not completely new, but the form and content are definitely. In fact, it looks like the buses are about to swallow this guy.
Yeah. Well, that was a really good thing to hear from him, and that really, you know, that sunk in. You know, I mean, generally, you know, you're attracted to content, and the form follows the content, but it can go the other way as well. But I think content is never form, but form is always content. You know, content is content, but form is you know, it's on a higher plane in a sense, you know.
In this picture, we have a visitation of everybody's, or not everybody,
Bruce,
of our friend
Bruce
Bruce
Gilden,
Gilden,
yes, absolutely.
back there with his M camera of some sort.
M4 he used to shoot with. Yeah, we used to shoot together pretty frequently in these days. So, you know, we're out together on that day.
I think this one and the man with the on-camera flash between the buses both illustrate the form versus content concept. This one works well, although, you know, had it been in a different light and a different composition, it may not have said anything. But with this, you have the focus pretty well on this guy's face. So there's a certain amount of information that you're getting from that. And then with those shadows, it just takes it to a different level, which I think a lot of times people don't realize, that the light can make or break an image, although in both pictures, the elements were the same.
Yes. This man, by the way, is the uncle of one of my dearest friends.
And you just happen to?
Yes, and I just happened to photograph him on the street. And when I showed him, I forget what the setting was, but I showed him this picture and he said, "Oh, that's my uncle." I'm not certain, but that might be Ivanka Trump. Ivana Trump. I'm not certain, but it might be.
I guess if we had some face recognition software, we could figure that out.
Well, from a long time ago.
It was interesting the number of furs that you were able to document on the streets, where now there's almost none.
Yes.
It's interesting how the combination of the anti-fur people and just the fashions, the change in a fashion, just they just completely disappeared. Probably not in people's personal lives, you know, when they're not on the street, but certainly visibly.
Well, this was the Reagan years, you know, and greed was good. Not much has changed, obviously, but the the fur activists were spraying women, you know, with spray paint, you know, on the coat, and so that happened enough that stopped women from wearing their coats, or men, both, you know. More women wore fur coats, but men wore them too, and they got sprayed as well. Their coats got sprayed. Now, I don't have the slightest idea what's going on there, but it's got that je ne sais quoi quality. Sometimes you don't know why a picture works, but it just does. I think what I'm most attracted to is how lithe the black man is. You know, I just love his body language behind her. Seems like a dancer.
Right. Yeah, you're right. I was almost thinking that myself. Almost thinking that. I guess there's a statement there. I'm not sure.
I was getting wet from that dog's piss. And, you know, from where I was, you can see actually it splattering. Oh, horrible.
We'll move on.
Horrible.
You, was this before or after the Gods of Times Square?
Oh, well before.
I mean, we were talking about this, and you used a 21 super angulon lens quite a bit during this period, or certainly some various wide angle lenses. So you were really not that far away from these two people. And I was wondering why this woman was holding up the cross, and it just seemed like it was threatening. Although she might have just been walking by and looked over at you, and it seems like doesn't want you to get any closer. Hard to know.
Well, you know, Christians come out there to evangelize and to, you know, try to get people into Christianity.
One of the things that I'm taken by is the way that you can photograph people on the street and be within the people on the street and make it work. So often I see pictures of people on the street and they just seem uninspired, so to speak, and lacking any depth. This is one that we've discussed a couple of times. And you mentioned how at a certain point you just wanted to do something completely different. And
Well, I was, since I came to photography kind of late in life, I had already, had 2 careers before. And since John Sharkovsky had read me the Riot Act, that I was, that I wasn't going to get any support from him, which basically trickled down to every gallery in New York, that I wasn't going to get any support, and I didn't. I would like to just, just try different things, just to, break up the monotony of taking pictures from eye level. So this is right in front of the World Trade Center number 2, the entrance to the subway there. And
okay, I see.
and so, there's a few steps down there. And so I parked myself on, very low, and I got down on the ground and just started, shooting up, probably shot, 10 or 12 frames, just to see what I would get. And I mean, this one is so different than the others, but
Yeah, in some ways, it feels like it doesn't belong with the rest. But,
yeah, I agree.
As I was saying, what I'm most taken by the picture, besides the fact you're, again, stretching the frame, is that you keep on looking at it and you see 3 people, very determined in where they're going, very fixed. But then if you look down in the lower part of it, you start seeing there's 4 more people or 5 more people, just doing different things. A hand holding a bag, a woman, I don't know, stepping somewhere, and a couple of people way in the background. So it's one of those images, as I was saying, where you can look at it, appreciate it for its dynamic sense, but you also can go into it deeply and be rewarded with other details that wouldn't have been obvious if you just took a quick look at it. And probably not on Instagram. Because nobody looks at a picture that long.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about including that possibly in the book. It may or may not make the cut. I don't know.
We have a couple of more questions.
Yes.
How often is luck involved versus executing a pre-visualized image?
Well, they go hand in hand. For some of these pictures where there's a lot of people in the frame, I am very much looking at trying to get every, head in the clear. So there's 10 people coming towards me or 8 people coming towards me, and I'm like going like this, I'm like, I'm sort of moving like this. I'm not looking at the foreground. I'm just looking at the faces in the back. It was something of you might call it an etude, a study to, try to do that, because it's very, very hard. It's very difficult to do that kind of a thing with photography because you've got a head behind a head, and that wasn't going to work for me. So I was, trying to approach things like that where I could get everybody in the clear. So that's not luck. That's I guess you would say that's intention, But as far as luck goes, I think you make your own luck in the sense that you're out there every day, you just do get gifts, and the more you do it, it's just like playing an instrument. The more you play your instrument, the better you get at it, and you surprise yourself at where you can go with your music. And it's the same with photography. If you're shooting 3 to 5 rolls a day on the street, you start to get loose,
Well, you develop your chops.
You develop your chops.
And you got to keep it. You got to work at it to keep your chops.
Yeah, and street photography is jazz, Street photography is definitely about chops, to do it well, everything's got to pretty much work, and that's not easy. There's a lot going on.
Well, also, as far as luck goes, it's always said you make your own luck. I think you just said that, but you have to be ready for it.
Yeah,
you have to be ready to grab that luck. So like the woman with the baby looking out the door, how many shots? You did 2 shots. You didn't even remember having taken them, yet you were there and present with your camera ready to do it. And that's
Well, that's number
that's
one.
luck.
You got to
That's,
have the camera out.
you were lucky to see it and to be aware of it, but you had to be ready to get it.
Right. I'm trying to get lucky. I am trying. I'm looking for luck. Definitely.
Uh,
But, in this period of time in my life on the street, there wasn't really a picture. I mean, there were some pictures I couldn't take, maybe for one reason or another, but I felt like I could take, I felt like I could take most pictures. So I was not.
well, there's a question about that in a way. Best tip at handling people objecting to being photographed.
Say that again?
Best tip on handling people objecting to being photographed.
Well, firstly, the aphorism, shoot first and ask questions later, is what applies. So you make the picture first, okay? You're not asking for permission, and you just have to be prepared to deal with the consequences if somebody gets upset. It's pretty rare, actually, that somebody gets upset. And also, when you make a photograph with intention, it tends to confuse people enough that they don't, they kind of accept what you're doing or whatever. They don't get uptight. I was only hit or chased, a couple of times in my whole life of shooting. And you can get away with a lot if you do it with intention. So that's the answer to that question. Is
Interesting.
if you're hesitating and you show fear, then somebody could get much more angry than if you just did it, and just like, boom, did it. And sometimes I would even do it, and I would hold the, where's the camera?
Oh yeah, where is your M2?
Yeah, it's around here somewhere. But
Bring it out.
well, this is a different one. This is the M3. But I would I would go like this, It's like, I mean, I was a character myself on the street, I mean, that's how you do this thing well. You become a character yourself, really, you're that character who's out there taking pictures of strangers without asking their permission, and you have reasons for doing it, which, may or may not upset people, but you're prepared to deal with the consequences.
Well, if you make them see if it appears you're crazier than they are, maybe they'll leave you alone.
Lisette Modell's advice to Diane Arbus when she asked that question was, say to people, if people say to you, why'd you do that? Why'd you photograph me? Lisette Modell told Diane Arbus to say, because you interest me. And I tried that, and it worked great. It was wonderful. I said, you interest me, I mean, you just gotta be, you gotta be on your feet, and you gotta hang loose, and, nobody's getting hurt here.
Well, I think there is a certain sense to what you say, that you're not, well, first off, you're not threatening, but you're not afraid either.
Yes.
So by being afraid or suddenly becoming overly self-conscious, you make yourself a mark. You suddenly are appearing to be guilty. So you must be doing something wrong.
But the other thing is, people have a right to get upset. That's important to know too. That you might startle them. I mean, I was always afraid, that I would do something terrible, and I tried not to startle people. I think that's why a lot of times people are looking at me, because I'm trying to make it fairly clear that I'm photographing. And I want them to notice me, not always, but sometimes, particularly, it's just a little bit of sensitivity that I feel is important.
So this comes to the end of our presentation.
And those are all possible pictures.
Yeah, and
I mean, there's another 50 or 60 that are also part, but we can't go into them, but anyway, I'm going to begin the editing process very, I mean, I've already started, and I'm looking for a publisher.
Always, we're all looking for a publisher.
Yes.
So then that brings us to the icons. There is
Oh,
Gary
yeah.
Winogrand in the back holding.
So yeah, this is a photograph I took of Gary Winogrand at Light Gallery in 1978, I think it was, possibly 79. It was the opening of, I'm not sure if it was stock photographs or it was public relations, but it was one of those two. I think it might have been stock photographs. At Light Gallery, the great gallery that it was at 724 Fifth. And so that's my Gary, it's almost like a Gary Winogrand picture. The woman on the left, this is a woman he would have probably photographed doing, exactly what she's doing, being her beautiful self. And then the final picture is my man, Robert Frank, who I got to know a little bit, toward the end of his life, when he really mellowed quite a bit. And it was beautiful, the transformation that happened to Robert at the end of his life, where he accepted the kindnesses and the adulation, and he didn't, it didn't bother him anymore. And I think June Leaf, his wife, was instrumental in helping him in that way. But I feel a great debt to him. And, when Winogrand taught the workshop that I took, he mentioned that he got the tilt, from Robert, from that picture of the man carrying the cross by a river, and it's tilted. And he said that's where it came from. It came from Robert.
Your camera is kind of cut you off from the nose.
Yes.
Down. There you go.
Yes. There I am.
Well, at any rate, we're done now.
Okay. Thank you.
I think it went quite well. This is where a couple of places you can find Richard on his website at richardsandler.com. On Instagram, it's ostop1946. His book, Eyes of the City, published by powerHouse Books, is available from powerHouse and is also available on Amazon Prime. Our next event will be with Ruddy Roy on December 3rd. He's a Brooklyn-based documentary photographer, quite extraordinary young man. Not that young, but young comparatively speaking. And he feels he has a very interpretive approach to how he does portraits, and he's a Leica-phile like very few photographers I know. So that's going to be December 3rd. Again, thanks so much,
Thank you,
Richard. You have anything final to say? Or any inspiring words to people out there trying to develop their chops?
We're in a bit of a pickle, but at this time in our lives right now, paying for the bad American karma that we were all born into. But if we keep our heads about us and, analyze our situation in a sort of structural sense and realize that, on some level we're living here more by crook than by hook, we will begin to undo the damage that we have all been party to and born into.
And that is all of our hopes. I hope that's all of our hopes.
Exactly.
That's really my hope.
Just being kind. Just being kind.
So thanks so much, everybody, for coming out this evening, or staying in, probably is more like it. And we will see you in December.